Hello everyone! This week I've decided to talk again about a favorite film of mine, 1944's Lara, directed by Otto Preminger. A police detective investigating the murder of a popular young socialite and businesswoman finds himself drawn into a strange web of jealousy and mistrust. Some of you, on seeing this video pop up, might have scratched your heads and said, "Didn't she already review this movie?" If you had that thought, you're absolutely right. I did review this on April 29th, 2017. At the time, it got a couple hundred views. It's since accumulated over 8,000. But that video bugs me. It has always stuck in my craw that I chose to keep it spoiler-free, which severely limited how much of the film I was able to talk about. I remember how difficult it was to write because I had to be extra crafty to avoid giving anything away, and then when it came to editing, picking the images I wanted to use and figuring out where to put them was a pain in the neck. And the result was a video just 6 minutes long in which I couldn't even cover some of my favorite things about the film. Now, I stand by my decision to not spoil the plots of movies or books. I don't care how old or how famous something is, I am not going to blurt out spoilers. Part of what I do here, a large part of what I do here, is introducing older media to a new audience. And if any viewers get sufficiently interested in something that I discuss, that they decide to check it out for themselves, which is great, I want them to be able to fully enjoy the stories, twists, and surprises. I had that opportunity. Why on earth would I want to rob someone else of the pleasure? So that's my long-standing policy, and I'm not going to change, no matter how many snarky comments I get. However, sometimes I've got to get into those twists and surprises, otherwise the discussion's incomplete. Therefore, every now and then, in a solo review, I go into spoilers, and that's what I'm going to do in this re-review of Lara. But first, some spoiler-free comments. I am a fan of Lara. I love its cast, its clever dialogue, its storyline, its tension, its style. You'll often find it on Best Film Noir lists, an honor I agree it deserves. It's got many hallmarks of the genre: a murder mystery, a complicated story told partially in flashback, a classic trenchcoat-wearing detective, a beautiful woman men desire and may even kill for, moral ambiguity, heightened passions, lies, and duplicity. But while Lara is considered quintessential film noir, in some respects it's unconventional. It's got a fairly limited setting, with much of the action occurring in Lara's extremely feminine apartment. It's all lacy curtains and frilly lampshades and fancy doodads everywhere. The typical noir landscape is absent. We have no seedy joints, no stark city streets. The group of characters is also tiny. You've got the detective and another policeman or two who makes an appearance, and a handful of suspects. It's pretty simple. We've got a few actors I'm quite fond of here. Gene Tierney as Lara Hunt, the murder victim. I love Gene Tierney. She could be soft and vulnerable, or she could be cold and aloof with a bitter edge to her voice. She was also one of the most attractive women to grace the silver screen during the golden age of Hollywood. And Dana Andrews as Detective Lieutenant Mark McPherson. I know there are those who call Andrews a wooden actor, but to those people, I would say you don't pay close enough attention. I've pointed out before that he was an eye actor, and I'll add that he was also a jaw actor. Check out his work here, or in The Best Years of Our Lives, or in The Oxbow Incident, or any of his other movies, really. Despite his personal struggles, he was consistent on screen, and I haven't seen a role yet where I felt he phoned it in. And that includes The Frozen Dead. So when you watch him perform a scene, don't expect grandiose gestures, but take notice of the subtle things he does. Vincent Price plays Shelby Carpenter, a charming southern ne'er-do-well, impoverished and unemployed, but accustomed to a posh lifestyle. And Judith Anderson plays Lara's relative, who is also involved with Shelby. It's a different role for Anderson if you're only familiar with her as Mrs. Danvers, or as the Vulcan High Priestess in Star Trek III. and Clifton Webb co-stars as Waldo Lydecker, a snobby, self-absorbed columnist who credits himself with making Laura a social success. I mentioned Laura's apartment being a centerpiece. I should add that Waldo's apartment is also featured. His place is more like a museum than a domicile. Macpherson first meets him in his absurdly spacious bathroom, where he sits in his tub writing his next venomous column. It's a great introduction to the character. Waldo Lydecker is a king in his palace. He doesn't get out of the tub and make himself presentable for his guest. He makes the man come to him, and he treats him kind of like an underling. Hand me that washcloth, get me my robe. But Macpherson isn't impressed, not by the wealth, not by the air of superiority, and not by Waldo's presentation. Note his derisive smirk as Waldo deigns to get out of the water. Lara is based on the novel of the same name by Vera Caspary, which Otto Preminger urged Fox studio head Darryl F. Zanuck to buy the rights to. Zanuck assigned Preminger to direct, and then fired him and gave the project to Ruben Mamoulian instead. But shortly after shooting began, Mamoulian was fired, and Preminger got the film back. Preminger is remembered as a controversial director. He made several successful and daring classics, but he also had a reputation for browbeating his actors, screaming at them and driving them to the breaking point by demanding dozens of takes. I don't know how tyrannical Preminger was on this set, but if he was a bully, it's hard to argue with the results. Costume designer and future fashion pioneer Bonnie Cashin was handpicked by Preminger, who also insisted the costume budget be expanded so that Laura's wardrobe would be both significant and authentic. And her clothes are a striking mix of glamorous and casual. She wears business attire in the office, expensive gowns and real jewels on the town, and loose, comfortably chic clothes at home. One highlight of the collection is the fitted gown she wears to the party where she meets Shelby Carpenter, and she also dons a few noteworthy hats that I think only the right person could pull off. You can learn more about Laura's costumes and the philosophy behind them in an article I found, which I've shared in the description. It also describes parallels between the fictional character and Gene Tierney herself. Preminger was similarly involved in the film's scoring, though the music didn't turn out the way he'd planned. He wanted the film's theme to be the Duke Ellington jazz standard Sophisticated Lady, but composer David Raksin objected, so Preminger gave him just one weekend to come up with an alternative, and Raksin wrote the haunting and romantic theme, which itself became a hit the following year. You hear the song so many times in the movie that you may get tired of it and ask, isn't there any other music here? But it's a lovely song. The film's peculiar romantic element, suggested by the opening bars, further distinguishes Laura from other noirs. There are plenty of films where the hardened detective falls for the murder suspect, but he doesn't usually fall for the victim. Yes, things take an unusual turn as Macpherson finds himself becoming infatuated with the late Laura Hunt, distracted by her lingering presence and her portrait, and making excuses to keep coming back to her apartment. And at this point, I'm going to issue the spoiler warning. Don't watch the rest of this video if you don't want any of the surprises ruined for you. So, about halfway through, there's a major twist, and honestly, it comes just in time. There's been a lot of talking to suspects, getting the lay of the land, figuring out motives and alibis. Now, it's time to shake things up. Macpherson, having tossed back quite a few glasses of Laura's alcohol and prowled around her apartment, reading her diary, smelling her perfume, looking in her closet, settles in her chair and goes to sleep. Moments later, he wakes to find himself facing the murder victim, very much alive, demanding to know who he is and what he's doing there. Turns out Laura's been away all weekend, and she has no idea that everybody thinks she's dead, and the police have no idea that the body in the morgue is someone else. Some may argue that this is not a twist. I've even seen it mentioned in blurbs previewing the plot, and I get it. The reveal comes early enough, it's still within the first half of the film, and it's not such a surprise if you recall that Gene Tierney had top billing, provided you know that Gene Tierney is playing Lara. But I personally feel it's saying too much to let people know from the start that Lara isn't really dead. McPherson's shocked, the other characters are shocked, and I think the audience should be shocked as well. At least on first viewing. Now, there's an interesting theory out there that what we're seeing may not be reality. Waldo Lydecker, having heard that McPherson's put in a bid to win Lara's portrait, needles him about his attraction to the deceased, asking if he's dreamt about her. Then we have this scene where McPherson falls asleep, note how the camera zooms in and backs out, and then, poof, Lara enters.
You're alive.
If you don't get out at once, I'm going to call the police.
You are Lara Hunt, aren't you? Aren't you?
According to the language of film, one could argue that McPherson is dreaming up this whole meeting and dreaming about what he'd like to happen after. And there's merit in that argument, because for the rest of the film, even as he's trying to ascertain if Lara herself might be the murderess, he's trying to determine if he has a chance with her. And he does! He manages to catch her interest and win her favor, which is kinda crazy because on paper, and certainly according to Lydecker, she's way out of his league. As a couple, they shouldn't make sense. This wouldn't happen in real life. But in a dream... There are also the lyrics to consider. Granted, this is a flawed point, this is a bad argument, don't rely on this to make your case, because the only version of Raxon's song that you hear in the film, both diegetic and non-diegetic, is instrumental, and Johnny Mercer wrote the lyrics after the fact without seeing the movie. But if you don't know that, and you do know the words, they can add further credence to the dream theory. Lara is the face in the misty light, footsteps that you hear down the hall, the laugh that floats on a summer night that you can never quite recall. And you see Lara on the train that is passing through, those eyes, how familiar they seem. She gave your very first kiss to you, that was Lara, but she's only a dream. It's a bit suggestive, isn't it? So, is everything that happens after McPherson falls asleep just a really good, elaborate dream he's having? I say no. If the second half is all a fantasy, the film never does anything to acknowledge it or confirm it. There's nothing in the last few minutes, no ambiguous final shot, no scene where McPherson wakes up. And besides... I don't find it so unlikely that Lara could become attracted to McPherson that the only possible explanation is that it's not really happening, that it's all just in his head. Is he the polar opposite of her previous love interests? Yes. So, women don't just fall for the same kind of guy over and over, and sometimes it's the one who's different from all the others who's most appealing. So, the dream theory is not part of my headcanon. However, it is fun to ponder long after the movie's finished. Lara is a dream woman. Her image changes to match each man's fantasy. For Waldo, she is beauty and talent, matched with the intellect to fully appreciate his own sophisticated wit. For Shelby, she embodies class and success. She's a breadwinner he can sponge on. For Mark, she's a damsel in distress, a helpless beauty in need of his protection. But also maybe the enticing femme fatale, the alluring, unattainable woman who may not be so unattainable after all. One of the most humorous things to me is how sloppy McPherson gets. He'll be following a line of questioning, and then suddenly he throws in something about Lara's relationship status, and everybody's wondering, what does that have to do with anything? And then there's the interrogation scene, which is one of my favorite scenes, period. At her "congratulations, you're not dead" party, McPherson makes a show of taking Lara away as the prime suspect, closing the scene by landing a punch in Shelby's gut. It sounds terrible out of context, but in context it's very satisfying. At the station, Lara is quietly indignant, while McPherson starts circling around her. In the most iconic shot, he shines lights in her face to intimidate her, but her resentful glare just gets him hot and bothered. He starts pacing around, and a chair gets in his way, and he impatiently pushes it aside, and eventually he can't stop himself asking, or rather demanding to know, if she told him her engagement was off just because she knew it was what he wanted to hear. The whole interaction is loaded with tension. Lara is defensive, and McPherson is seething with frustration and desire. He's so worked up that it seems he might tear the room apart, and Lara's kind of confused by it until she suddenly realizes what's really going on here, that this isn't just about the murder. At the end of the scene, they come to an understanding, and it's one of those things that you might say, okay, well, that's far-fetched, or that came out of nowhere, but I like the outcome anyway. If you enjoy this pairing of actors, you might like to know that Tierney and Andrews starred together twice more after this, in 1948's The Iron Curtain, a political thriller directed by William Wellman, and 1950's Where the Sidewalk Ends, another noir directed by Preminger, where Andrews plays an aggressive cop. Tierney also appeared in some other films with Vincent Price, who adored her, 1945's Leave Her to Heaven, a chilling noirish thriller in brilliant color, and 1946's Dragonwyck, a gothic romance with one of Price's earliest demented leading roles. Lara is a more dialogue-heavy crime drama, which may put some people off, and it's also more focused on relationships than some may care for. But for me, there's just one snag in the film that takes me out of it a bit, and that's the positioning of Waldo Lydecker as a jealous lover. I just don't find it that convincing. Webb's Waldo is more in love with himself than anyone else. He's fussy, snooty, and slightly effeminate, a man who likes to surround himself with the most beautiful things and the most beautiful people, like Lara. The way to make it work is to envision him not as having romantic feelings, but possessive ones. Toward Lara, he has a selfish sense of ownership. He made her, therefore he has a superior claim on her. None of the other men are nearly as wise or as witty, not one of them deserves her, or will be able to fully appreciate her. She's one of his trademarks, a possession everyone needs to recognize belongs to him and him alone. And if he can't have her, no one else will. That works, but when it shifts to portraying him as a jealous lover, it's kind of a tough sell. Does it wreck the whole movie for me, though? No. One last thing, and I don't know where to put this, so I'll just drop it here at the end. I like the mini baseball game McPherson plays with to keep himself calm. It's one of those puzzles where you have to patiently joggle the thing, move it from side to side to try to get the little tiny metal balls to stick on the magnets. We had a few of those around when I was a kid, and there were things like that in a drawer at my grandfather's house, so seeing it always makes me feel nostalgic. It's also a neat character quirk, and it does clue us into how the character is feeling in a later scene. And now you know why my old review of Lara bothered me so much. There's a lot of juicy stuff that happens in the second half, and I didn't let myself talk about any of it. Thanks for letting me fix that mistake, and I hope you've enjoyed this redo of a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Lara, so go ahead and share those in the comments below if you'd like, and I'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.